Welcome to Built to Finish. I'm your host, Stephen Pivnik. Join me each week as we explore the journeys of audacious goal setters. This includes experienced founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs sharing pivotal moments that propel their success. We'll also be talking with endurance athletes who push the limits of physical and mental ability. This show is brought to you by Acresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services to help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Let's get started. Today's guest has helped create over $1.2 billion in value for companies like Google, Expedia, and Nestle. He's been cited by Forbes and Entrepreneur Magazine as a top online marketer. He is the best-selling author of multiple books, including his latest, Unleash Your Primal Brain. He has delivered hundreds of keynotes across 4 continents to share his insights and psychology and persuasion. And he may be the best self-taught salsa dancer you're likely to meet today. Tim Ash, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be with you.
No, great to have you. And you know what? We'll talk about salsa dancing a little bit later on if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So your book, Unleash Your Primal Brain, which by the way, I loved, dives into the evolutionary psychology behind decision making, motivation, and human behavior. What motivated you to put all of this knowledge onto paper?
It's got a long genesis. When I attended UC San Diego a long time ago, I double majored in computer engineering and cognitive science. So I always had an interest in the brain. And then I stayed at UC San Diego for 7 years in the PhD program in what would these days be called AI or neural networks, basically self-learning systems. So I've always had an interest in the brain. And in my professional career, I applied it mostly to marketing. I ran a digital marketing agency that focused on
Hmm.
making websites more effective for about 25 years. so,
Okay.
and I've come back to this first love, I guess you could say, of understanding and decoding human behavior. So the book that you mentioned, Unleash Your Primal Brain, is really kind of a guidebook on evolution, but in a very accessible way. It's the operating system for all 8 billion of us on the planet. And so it's what we share in common and what we picked up along the way through evolution.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for writing and publishing it because I think it contains a wealth of knowledge. I highlighted so many different pages in the book. So one of my favorites was your comments about habits. I'm huge on habits and forming healthy habits. And you say that habits are evolutionary shortcuts, that the brain prefers routines to conserve energy, which is a wonderful way to look at it because, yes, it's much easier to perform a habit versus having to think about something and make a decision. So, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The our brains cost a lot of energy every day. And what I mean by that is even compared to our closest relatives, the great apes, we burn about 3 times the percentage of calories to just keep our brains going, about a quarter of our resting calories every
Wow.
day. Yeah, it's a massive amount. We had to, as a result, borrow to make, for example, our digestive systems less efficient. We have wimpier muscles than chimps and our close cousins. And so all of that is to make the brain more efficient and more powerful. But that also means that you want to basically keep it in standby mode. So the whole brain isn't being used all the time. And so you want to uh, keep conscious thought, the stuff that really burns the glucose, to a minimum. So most of our stuff is habits, automatic reactions, and just quick little nudges. It's nothing super deliberate. We're not thinking most of the time. We're on autopilot.
I love it. Now I have a much better understanding why habits are so much easier to execute than willpower, because willpower requires a lot of cognitive load.
Yeah, there's a famous study about judges actually in Israel, and when they were looking at parole applications for people, and it turned out they were most likely to give parole in the morning and right after lunch. Now, if you went to them and you said, "Hey, you're making parole decisions based on your blood sugar levels and when you last ate," they'd say, "No, I'm a very deliberate jurist." But in fact, that's what happens. We run out of conscious, I guess you could say, intention and
Hmm.
also brain energy earlier in the day. So if you're going to make big important decisions, make them early in the day and don't wait till the end when your executive function and your reserves are depleted.
That's a great advice. Make important decisions early in the day. I love that. So you also emphasize the brain's evolutionary focus on survival rather than happiness. we all want to be more happy, but we're focusing on survival. Is there a hack to this so that we can be more
Well,
happy?
I feel like I'm going to be probably dumping a lot of buckets of cold water throughout this whole interview because no, I'm not one of those optimists. The brain wasn't designed for happiness; it was designed for survival, to help your
Hmm.
body survive so it could reproduce, so that the genes could pass themselves on. You could think of us as a gene replicating machine. The brain's just there
Yep.
to make that more likely. And if you look at it from just a chemical point of view, most of the quote unquote happy chemicals only circulate in your bloodstream for a few seconds or some small number of minutes, whereas stress chemicals like cortisol can stay in there for hours or days. So if you were permanently happy, if you were just in a blissed out state, you wouldn't do anything, you wouldn't move, you wouldn't act, you wouldn't feed yourself. You're just so the incentive for survival is to be unhappy with your current situation. So there's no permanent state of happiness. There are certain things you can do to um, be happier, like recapitulate gratitude and things like that, and be more intentional. But in general, you can't reset your happiness to a higher level.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. So, moving on, you mentioned that fear is a strong motivator. Obviously, everybody knows that. How can organizations or leaders use fear ethically in persuasion without crossing the line into manipulation?
Well, I think that from a marketing standpoint, which is where I spend a lot of my career, that one's kind of obvious. Most brands have these guidelines, and we're the nice brand, we're the happy brand, we're the make you feel good brand. And in fact, if you want to motivate us, remember we were talking about how the brain likes to stay on autopilot. If you want me to actually change my situation, you have to perturb my brain. It's like going over a pothole, ba bump. You go down, you go up, and that like kind of transient, that rebound, the amount of vertical travel of that wheel is what determines how painful I find the problem and how much I'm willing to devote to its solution. And so if you're only saying nice stuff, that doesn't really motivate me to change my behavior, to get off of that autopilot. You have to use a combination of negative stuff and positive stuff. It's basically take me down into the bowels of hell and then let me visualize what heaven is like. And then that difference is the amount I'm motivated to do anything to change. So most leaders and most marketing people, they only do the happy talk. Everything's great and it's all wonderful, and buy our product or get on board with our company plans. And that's not how you motivate people at all. You have to use a combination of both. What happens if you don't, which is not necessarily a threat or unethical. It's just like stay on this trajectory and bad stuff will happen.
It's just a data point, right? If you don't do this, here's the data point of what may happen.
Yeah, it's reality based. You're not threatening anyone. But it's much more effective. So, and of course that makes sense. The people that were aware of the bear or the lion running to attack you were much more likely to survive than the ones that ignored that. So we have about a 2.5 to 1 bias towards negative information and identifying threats in our environment. Um, and that can be healthy. By the way, one of the reasons entrepreneurs are successful is because they actively counteract that negativity bias by being extra optimistic. It's like, screw you, I'm going to do it anyway. I don't really care what you think. I mean, a lot of things have gotten done that way because, in effect, by compensating for it and saying being twice as positive as you should be, you're actually getting a more realistic view of the world.
That sounds very familiar. Screw you, I'm doing this anyway.
Yeah, I've been guilty of that a time or two myself.
Yeah, every entrepreneur has. So you also say that memory is selective and unreliable, which is scary.
Mm.
How can marketers build trust in a world where perception often matters more than reality?
Well, there is no reality. And I'm not being metaphysical or talking about quantum stuff. But what we have is, and again, if you think of it from the brain's survival perspective, here's my current situation. Here are the resources available in my environment. Okay. And all I can do is take a step in a better direction? Am I going to take a step in a direction that makes things better or worse? So everything is
Hmm.
relative. For example, I rented a jet ski on a vacation in Mexico once, and they said, well, there's only one more jet ski, and there's other people lined up that want to rent it. So however much it costs, I wanted it. So
Right.
that was just optimizing for my local environment. I wasn't comparing it to the price of a jet ski, in another location at another time. I was just looking at my
Hmm.
immediate environment, saying this is better than this. It's always a relative comparison.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So let's talk about your keynote. I know that you have recently developed a new keynote that
Mm.
you're in the process of delivering. It's called the Initiated Tribe Framework. I love the three pillars that you shared with me prior. So can you share those three pillars and give a little bit of a description on how this keynote is structured?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you know, in addition to public speaking all over the world, my main um, occupation, I guess you would say, is doing advisory for senior executives. And so this is a
Hmm.
speech that's actually aimed at leaders in companies. It could be the C suite, it could be department heads, or even team leaders. But the speech is called The Initiated Tribe: How Evolved Leaders Are Winning the War for Talent. And it's how to address the giant, I guess you could say, worker shortage that we have, because baby boomers are retiring, Gen Zs are stepping in to replace them, but it's a much smaller group of people. So there's this built-in giant worker shortage, about 700,000 people a year just in the US. That's going to peak at a million too before it starts ebbing. And so, how do you get people to be loyal to your company, to be productive, to be both passionate and productive? Actually, that's what the speech is about. And all of the workplace fads we've tried, like casual Fridays and work and open floor plans and remote work, none of that stuff's worked because it's not built on evolutionary psychology. So it's not built on this solid foundation of what we spent the last 200,000 years evolving into. So my speech tackles it from that perspective. The Initiated Tribe framework describes this process of personal purpose for the leaders, developing a core culture, and then initiating people, very importantly, very deliberately into it to kind of mimic the experiences that we had back on the plains of East Africa, that automatically bonded any tribe. So these techniques that I'm talking about, they work for starting a book club, high performance company, special forces military unit, a new religion. It doesn't matter. This is the mechanics of how you bond any group, regardless of your culture.
So it's applicable across the board, across multiple organizations, multiple departments.
Yes, and you can use it in business. You can actually, like I said, use it hopefully in positive settings in your community and other social tribes that you're also a member of.
That's been fascinating. In addition to delivering this personally to leadership teams, will you be creating a course in the future on
Well,
this?
what I actually the keynote is an introduction to it. It's basically a how to think about it speech, because some of the stuff I've come up with is very counterintuitive, and most people are gonna um, want to stick to the same old fads and leadership stuff that they've been reading about. But I'd rather put it, like I said, on a much stronger foundation. And then, yes, I work in an advisory capacity with companies to actually implement this inside of the company. So there is quite a bit of um, yeah, workshops and one-on-one coaching and other things that go into making sure that it fits your company. So the general framework
Understood.
works. It very much matters what the personal purpose of the leaders is and what kind of cultural package they put together to initiate around.
Right. So I'm assuming you jointly come up with measurements and KPIs to see how much the implementation of this has moved the needle.
Yes, it's very important to do that. I think it's a little harder on the how would you say, the softer side, because we're talking about people skills and culture and things like that. But I've had all kinds of very powerful results already, and we're now collecting data from several of the customers in order to get more numerically based stuff. But in terms of productivity, in terms of turnover of your workers, all of that, all of those metrics are moving absolutely in a positive direction. And it's very hard to do that in this environment where anybody can quiet quit on you tomorrow and get a better job because there's such low unemployment.
Right. Fascinating stuff. So, you talk a lot about tribalism and how it plays a significant role in human behavior, in all of our behavior.
Mhm.
So, in today's polarized world, how can we foster cooperation and bridge divides while honoring all of these primal instincts that everybody has?
Well, again, here's another bucket of cold water coming your way.
Bring it.
Yeah, tribalism is a tricky thing. Remember, in the past, we were literally a single tribe. There were about 100 to 200 people. We're wandering
Right?
around. There's um, dangerous animals and all kinds of threats around us. About a third of the people in our tribe were genetically related to some degree. And
Hmm.
there were 1,000 times fewer people than today. So imagine if another tribe comes along. That was actually the danger to us. I don't know what they'll do. They can enslave me, they can kill me, they can do a lot of bad things. And so it wasn't like there was a lot of trust. We evolved to be really loyal to our tribe. Being a good team player was more important actually than being right. So passing on the culture of your tribe and being a loyalist was our survival edge, I guess you could say. And so if you look at it from that perspective, there's really no polarization and loyalty are flip sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. The problem is we no longer live in single tribes. Now we have these civilizations involving billions of people.
Hmm.
And when you have that, then you have a bunch of different cultural tribes that you're loosely affiliated with. So we're more like a mosaic of tribal cultures now rather than a unified single tribal culture. And that's where a lot of the problems begin. But I don't know that you can solve them. It's sort of built into our DNA at this point.
Right, right. Definitely, definitely. So, switching gears a little bit to the entrepreneurial world, I
Mhm.
speak with a lot of guests on this show that have successfully scaled and sold their businesses. Going through this entire sale and exit process is super, super stressful. Involves a lot of teamwork, for the executive team and then the extended team later on during due diligence. Based on all the knowledge that you have about our primal brain, what advice would you give entrepreneurs that are about to undertake this like super stressful initiative?
I would say, and this is also the first step in the initiated tribe framework, is every leader, especially the founders, have to be very clear on their personal purpose.
Hmm.
That's foundational. Now, besides all the practical stuff, I'm not going to arm wave over it, but your health span improves if you have personal purpose. All of these good things happen. You live longer and you live healthier. And that should be just its own reward. But in terms of being able to motivate and build your company and get a higher valuation, that's the foundational stuff to me. You can outsource tactics and strategy and even your vision. What you can't outsource is the culture and the personal purpose parts. That's what everything else is built on top of. So that's where you should be spending almost all of your time. So if you haven't gone through the exercise of finding a positive personal purpose, Viktor Frankl talks about this in his book Man's Search for Meaning. It's just really
Yep.
foundational to living a quality life, and it underpins everything, including if you're pouring all of your energy into the business and scaling it and trying to sell it. I have a personal purpose. I'm happy to share it with you if you like.
I'd love to hear it. Go ahead.
So my positive one, I also have a negative one. It's what my unconscious does when I'm not aware of things and starts running the show. But my positive one is I co-create a world of peace, safety, and love through joyous expression and service.
I love it.
And that personal purpose is also a very compact way of making decisions. It basically encapsulates your values hierarchy. So for me, most
Sure.
of life these days is kind of a hell yes. That means I'm on purpose, or no. There's no maybe. There's no in between.
Hmm.
It's just a way to ration your energy and to figure out what you want to put your very limited remaining time of being alive into.
So it's completely binary for you. If it meets your personal preference, hell yes. Otherwise,
It's a
sorry,
no,
no.
and most things are a no. So I guess the best way to describe it is probably is to say I care more and more about less and less.
I love that. That is great advice to give to others. I should adopt this. Care more and more about less and less. You've heard it here. And so, what is your negative one?
Ooh, the negative one. Well, again, this is not that I have a. The way to think about it is so again, a purpose is something that's compact that you can state in a sentence or two that is not achievable. It's not a stretch goal. It's not like retire by this age with this much money in the bank. That's a goal. That's not a purpose. So purpose is like your North Star, the direction you're aiming at. But to get to that North Star, you can approach it from a bunch of different directions. And my
Hmm.
particular one has to do with my shadow, or the subconscious that drives me, my old tapes, whatever you want to call it, life programming, trauma, all of that's in there. And the shadow is the stuff you repress or deny. And so
Okay.
with my shadow purpose, I just try to become aware of it earlier in more subtle ways, so it doesn't rule my life as often, or yeah, as with such negative consequences. And my shadow purpose is I create a world of loneliness, disconnection, and pain by seeking distractions, acting like a victim, and indulging in self-righteous anger.
Hmm.
That's my
That's deep.
particular flavor of it. So if I catch myself doing any of those things, I go, oh, there you are. You're there you are. So I just try to put the shadow in front of me so I can look at it. And then it doesn't run my life. And then I can reorient back to my positive, intentional purpose.
I love it. I love it. So how did that go again? Focus
Um,
more on less?
Yeah, well, care more and more about less and less. Now, that's the
Yeah.
positive part. That's like saying
Yeah, yeah.
basically you're either going in the direction of your positive purpose or you're not. But then to not get hijacked by your subconscious, you have to keep checking for your shadow or negative purpose too. And you have to be clear about what that is so it's easier to spot.
I love it. So I think that's going to be the title for this episode. Care more and more about
Less and
less and
less.
less. This has been a lot of really great information, Tim. Thank you so much for being on the show. Where can folks find you? How can they contact you?
The easiest way, if you're interested in my public speaking, is just to go to timash.com, TIMASH. If you're interested in the book or my Primal Brain advisory for senior executives, just go to primalbrain.com. And by the way, Steve, you mentioned that you have the book. It's
I
also
do.
available as an audiobook. But I actually recommend that you get a paper copy because you're going to want to, like you did, take a lot of notes probably, and that's hard to do with an audiobook. So there's
Yeah,
no, yes, you could say extra fat in the book. It's all just lean and mean, but very digestible. So I suggest you get the paper copy.
no, I think that's really good advice because I've started a lot of books on Audible, and there were so many situations where I just wanted to highlight things and take additional notes. So I stopped listening, bought the paper version, and continued.
Yeah, I think that it really makes sense for a lot of popular science books like mine or business books to, I think of them as weapons. You want the paper copy so you can mark it up. What I like to listen to on audio is fiction. Or historical stuff, so where a story is being told. But if it's informational, it's hard to do that in an audiobook. Although, you get to spend 5 hours with my, fantastic voice. It's like
I
having
love
me
it. I
there.
love it. Well, like I mentioned earlier, I really enjoyed the book. I think it's chock full of incredible information that everybody will definitely enjoy. Tim, again, thank you so much for being on the show. I want to thank all of the listeners and watchers for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, please like and subscribe. And if there's information here that you think somebody else would benefit from, please forward this episode to them. Tim, again, thank you so much. That's a wrap for this episode of Built to Finish. Thank you for tuning in. For show notes and more details, head over to podcast.stephenpivnik.com. Special thank you to our sponsor, Accresis, offering tailored, high-impact advisory services that help founders get to their finish line with a strategic acquisition or majority investor recapitalization. Catch you next week.